Professor Zixtal's iridescent tentacles rippled with barely contained frustration as she reviewed the combat class roster on her quantum slate for the 5th time. The gentle hum of the administrative office did nothing to soothe her mounting irritation. There, nestled between a crystalline juggernaut from the Perseus arm and a plasma phase Mersenne, sat an entry that made absolutely no sense. Sarah Chen, human. Classification: restricted species, combat. This has to be a clerical error, Zixtal muttered, her secondary eyes blinking in sequence, a sign of deep agitation among her species. She pulled up the Galactic Species database, scrolling past entries for silicon-based warriors and energy beings capable of destroying small moons. The restricted species classification was typically reserved for the most dangerous beings in known space, creatures that could level cities with a sneeze or telepathically command armies. And then there were humans. The holographic display showed their specifications. Endurance slightly above galactic average, strength below median for their size class, no natural weapons, no enhanced sensory capabilities, no psychic potential. They weren't even particularly large. The only remarkable traits listed were high pattern recognition and adaptable problem-solving. Hardly the stuff of nightmares. Yet there it was, in pulsing red quantum text. Ries tu reikited from combat training. Alpha LEVELC allierance required for OVERID. A soft chime announced a visitor. Zixtal looked up to see Dean Enxclara floating in the doorway, his gaseous form swirling with shades of diplomatic green. Questioning our new observer's classification, he asked, condensing slightly to fit through the door. With all due respect, Dean, it makes no sense, Zixtal said, gesturing at her display. We have students who can tear through battleship armor with their bare appendages. The Mercennes can transform into living weapons. Yet we're treating this human as if she's equally dangerous. More dangerous, actually. Enxclara corrected, his form shifting to a more serious purple. The board almost denied her application entirely. It took 3 appeals and a personal guarantee from the Earth ambassador to get her approved as an observer. But why? Their historical records show no significant martial achievements. They've barely expanded beyond their home system. They don't even have quantum weaponry yet. The dean's form swirled thoughtfully. Tell me, Professor, have you ever wondered why humans are the only species required to have observers at our combat institutions? Not students, observers. I assumed it was diplomatic courtesy. That's what they assumed too. The dean's color shifted to something Zixtal had never seen before, a deep, troubled ultraviolet. Keep an eye on your new observer, Professor. Document everything. You might start to understand why the restriction exists. The conversation was interrupted by another chime. A young human female stood in the doorway, wearing the silver observer's uniform of the Galactic University. Her dark hair was tied back practically, and she carried a standard-issue quantum slate. Everything about her seemed disappointingly ordinary. Sarah Chen reporting for orientation, Professor, she said, offering a respectful bow. I'm really excited to learn from your combat expertise, even if I can't participate directly. Yes. Well, Zixtal managed, all 4 eyes fixed on the seemingly harmless creature. Welcome to the Galactic University of Combat Arts. I trust you understand the restrictions placed on your observation. Of course. Sarah's eyes lit up with genuine enthusiasm. No direct participation in combat exercises, no handling of weapons, and no suggesting tactical improvements. I'm just here to watch and learn about different species' combat styles. Though I have to admit, I don't understand why humans have so many restrictions. We're not exactly the most impressive species out there. The dean's form rippled with what might have been amusement or anxiety. It was hard to tell. You might be surprised, Ms. Chen. You might be surprised. As Sarah took her seat in the observation area, Zixtal couldn't shake the feeling that she was missing something obvious. The human looked so harmless, yet her presence had caused more security reviews than the admission of an actual living superweapon last semester. Well, if the dean wanted her to document everything, she would. Though she seriously doubted this small, enthusiastic human would prove more noteworthy than her neutron star wrestling champion from the Outer Rim. She had no idea how wrong she was. The combat demonstration arena hummed with energy as third-year students showcased their mastery of advanced weapon systems. Professor Zixtal's tentacles moved in practiced patterns, taking notes as a crystalline juggernaut demonstrated proper form with a plasma lance. Perfect execution. Tizur, she commented as the student cleanly bisected 3 combat drones. Notice the precise energy distribution through the weapon's core. This is why proper stance is crucial for. Excuse me, Professor. Sarah's voice cut through the familiar lecture. The human had been quietly observing for 2 weeks now, taking detailed notes and asking surprisingly intelligent questions about xenobiology. But isn't the plasma lance's efficiency limited by the cylindrical containment matrix? The arena fell silent. Even Tizur's crystalline form stopped refracting light for a moment. The containment matrix is standard design, Zixtal replied carefully. It's been optimized over centuries of development. Sarah's brow furrowed in that peculiar way humans had when puzzled. But if you adjusted the matrix to a hexagonal cross-section and added gravitational micropulses to stabilize the plasma flow, you could increase power output by at least 40%. The math is pretty straightforward. The weapons master, an ancient forge mine named X-227, floated forward, its metallic form radiating concern. Young observer, what you're suggesting would require completely redesigning the containment principles that have governed plasma weapons for millennia. Oh. Sarah blushed slightly. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. It just seemed obvious. Please continue. But the demonstration had lost its momentum. Students whispered among themselves, and X-227 began running simulations on a quantum terminal, its mechanical appendages moving with unusual haste. Later that afternoon, during the advanced shielding practicum, Sarah raised her hand again. The class had been studying a perfect personal defense shield, recently developed by the prestigious Mersenne Defense Institute. What if you modulated the shield frequency to match the user's bioelectric field? She asked. It would reduce power consumption and increase coverage without compromising integrity. The Mersenne student demonstrating the shield rippled with distress, their plasma form fluctuating wildly. That's not. The calculations alone would. I sketched out some basic equations during lunch, Sarah offered helpfully, holding up her quantum slate. The mathematical proofs flowing across its surface made several energy-based students dim their luminescence in shock. Professor Zixtal quickly moved to change the subject, but the damage was done. By day's end, X-227 had confirmed Sarah's plasma lance calculations were flawless, and the Mersenne Defense Institute was demanding copies of her shield modifications. I don't understand, Sarah confessed when Zixtal called her to the office. I was just trying to help. Those inefficiencies were so obvious. Doesn't everyone see them? The professor studied her student carefully. Sarah seemed genuinely confused by the commotion she'd caused. There was no pride in her suggestions, no attempt to show off. She truly didn't realize what she'd done. Ms. Chen, Zixtal said slowly, you've just revolutionized 2 different weapon systems by accident. During a basic demonstration class. Oh, Sarah looked down at her hands. I'm sorry. I know I'm not supposed to suggest improvements. It's just, when I see something that could work better, it's hard not to mention it. Should I stay quiet, even if I notice something dangerous? Like the microfracture in the quantum rifle's containment chamber during the targeting exercise. Zixtal's primary heart nearly stopped. What microfracture? The one that's going to cause a cascade failure in about. Sarah checked her slate. 17 minutes. I was going to mention it earlier, but I didn't want to interrupt again. The next few minutes were chaos as the Academy's safety protocols engaged, evacuating the weapons vault before the quantum rifle could undergo catastrophic failure. As emergency teams secured the area, Zixtal watched Sarah, helping coordinate the evacuation with calm efficiency, suggesting optimal routes and safety improvements with the same casual ease she'd shown in class. The professor's tentacles curled with dawning realization. Perhaps the human's restriction wasn't about keeping her from learning combat. Perhaps it was about keeping combat from learning from her. Professor Zixtal's research lab was a mess of holographic displays, each showing different reports from institutions that had hosted human observers. Her tentacles moved frantically between screens, correlating data that painted an increasingly disturbing picture. Computer, display case file 2187B. Martian Medical Exchange, she commanded. The central hologram flickered to show a smiling human medical student named James Rodriguez, who had visited the Regelian War College 5 years ago. Subject displayed exceptional interest in xenobiology, the report read. Initially studied defensive biological adaptations across species. Questions about cellular regeneration led to breakthrough in combat medicine. Subsequent research inadvertently created prototype for targeted biological weapons. Project terminated. Subject remained unaware of military applications. Zixtal's secondary eyes blinked rapidly as she pulled up another file. Case 3391C, Engineering Exchange Program. The image showed a young human woman examining a power core. Subject Hannah Mills observed regular maintenance procedures on standard shield generators, suggested simple efficiency improvements that resulted in development of shield-piercing technology. Notes indicate subject believed she was helping reduce power consumption. A gentle knock interrupted her research. Dean X. Clara's gaseous form swirled in the doorway, now a deep shade of knowing indigo. "Finding the pattern?" he asked. "It's impossible," Zixtal replied, her tentacles gesturing at the displays. Every single human observer, they all did this. A logistics student at the Centaurian Battle Academy redesigned their supply chains and accidentally created a new form of siege warfare. An architecture student's questions about space station design led to the development of structural weak point analysis that made half our defensive installations obsolete. And none of them realized what they were doing, the dean added quietly. But how? They're not malicious. They're not even trying to create weapons. She struggled to find the right words. They optimize, Anx Clara finished. They see systems and instinctively find ways to make them more efficient, even if those systems are designed for war. Zixtal pulled up Sarah's latest observations. In just 3 weeks, the human had innocently pointed out 37 critical improvements to various combat systems. Her suggestion about using maintenance drones for orbital defense had caused the Planetary Security Council to convene an emergency session. "Watch this," Zixtal said, playing a recording from yesterday's class. On screen, Sarah was talking to a quantum phase warrior about their traditional battle meditation. "So you sync your quantum state with your weapons?" Sarah asked, fascinated. "That's amazing. But wouldn't it be more effective if you extended the synchronization to include your opponent's quantum signature? You could theoretically predict and counter their moves before they made them." The quantum phase warrior had gone completely still, their crystalline form clouding with shock. What Sarah had suggested so casually was essentially a way to turn their entire combat philosophy into a perfect prediction system. "She doesn't even understand what she's doing," Zixtal marveled. "To her, it's just logical improvement." "Now you see why the restriction exists," the dean said. "Humans don't just learn combat techniques, they evolve them. Not through malice or militant genius, but because they can't stop themselves from finding better ways to do everything, even killing." A notification pinged on Zixtal's terminal. Sarah had submitted her observation notes for the day. The professor opened them, then felt her primary heart stutter. "Dean," she said slowly, "she just solved the Gordian defense problem. The unsolvable tactical scenario. we've used to test strategic thinking for the past 3 centuries. She included it in a footnote about improving cafeteria queue efficiency. Clara's gaseous form condensed with concern. How? She says, and I quote, "If you applied the same principles of optimizing lunch line flow to fleet movements, you could create a perfect defensive formation that's also an ideal attack pattern." I sketched out some examples while waiting for my food. Hope this helps make things run smoother. The dean and professor stared at the casual notes that had just revolutionized space combat doctrine. In the attached diagrams, Sarah had drawn little smiley faces next to her fleet formations. "We have to finish this study," Zixtal said firmly. "The galaxy needs to understand exactly why humans are restricted from combat training, not because they're dangerous, but because they make danger itself more efficient," Clara finished grimly. "And they do it with a smile." The crisis simulation chamber hummed with anticipation as final-year students prepared for the infamous impossible scenario. Professor Zixtal observed from the control room, her tentacles moving across the controls with practiced precision, while Sarah sat quietly in the observer's corner. The chamber's quantum processors generated the tactical nightmare, a planetary invasion scenario featuring overwhelming odds, unbreakable defenses, and a civilian population to protect. In 3 centuries, no one had ever found a viable solution. "Beginning simulation," Zixtal announced. "Remember, the goal is not to win, but to learn from the impossible." The chamber filled with holographic ships, planetary defense systems, and swarms of hostile forces. A Mercen student attempted a brilliant defensive maneuver, lasting 6 minutes longer than average before their forces were overwhelmed. A crystalline juggernaut tried breaking through the orbital blockade, achieving an impressive 12% civilian evacuation before defeat. Sarah's hand rose hesitantly. "Yes, Ms. Chen?" Zixtal asked, already feeling her primary heart rate increasing. "Well," Sarah bit her lip, tablet in hand. "I was wondering about the planetary infrastructure, specifically the automated delivery system for civilian supplies." The professor's secondary eyes narrowed. "What about it?" "It's just..." Sarah turned her tablet around, showing a series of sketches she'd made. "Every populated world has millions of delivery drones handling daily logistics, right? Small, numerous, and already programmed to navigate urban environments. If you reprogram them to carry shield generators instead of packages..." The chamber fell silent. Even the quantum processors seemed to pause. "You could create a distributed defense network," Sarah continued, oblivious to the growing tension. "The drones' existing navigation protocols would let them provide optimal coverage. Their supply distribution algorithms could be adapted to prioritize critical areas. And since they're already integrated into civilian infrastructure, the invasion force couldn't target them without destroying the very resources they're trying to capture." She flipped to another page of calculations. "Plus, if you add some basic swarm coordination protocols, I based these on how our delivery drones avoid traffic collisions, you could create dynamic shield patterns that..." "Stop." Zixtal's voice shook slightly. "Please display scenario modification Alpha 1. The chamber's computers processed Sarah's suggestions. The holographic battle began again. This time, the swarms of civilian delivery drones activated, their shield network turning the entire planet into an impenetrable, self-adapting fortress. The invasion force, unable to establish a foothold without destroying their own objectives, fell into disarray. "Total defensive success," the computer announced. "Civilian casualties, 0%. Military objective, unattainable." "I mean, you could probably improve it further," Sarah added helpfully. "The drone's standard power cells would need upgrading, and their distribution algorithms could be more efficient if you..." She trailed off, finally noticing everyone's expressions. "Did I say something wrong?" Professor Zixtal stared at the human who had just casually turned every delivery drone in the galaxy into a potential military asset. "Ms. Chen, do you realize what you've done?" "Solved the puzzle." Sarah smiled uncertainly. "I know we're supposed to learn from failure, but it seemed silly not to use resources that were already there. Any civilization advanced enough to have interstellar travel would have similar delivery infrastructure, so the solution should work pretty much anywhere. A quantum phase student raised their crystalline appendage. Professor, doesn't this mean every developed world in the galaxy is now a potential fortress? Not potentially, Zixtel corrected quietly. Actually, the simulation uses real infrastructure data. Every world with automated delivery systems could implement this strategy within their existing frameworks. She turned to Sarah. And you developed this solution while waiting for my lunch delivery yesterday, Sarah admitted. The drone was late because of traffic, and I started thinking about optimization algorithms, and then during the simulation it just seemed obvious. She paused. I broke another combat system, didn't I? Zixtel watched the simulation replay, showing billions of humble delivery drones transforming into an invincible defense grid. All because a human couldn't help but think of a better way. No, Ms. Chen, she said finally. You didn't break the system. You showed us why your species terrifies the galaxy's finest military minds. She gestured at the holographic display. You don't even need weapons to revolutionize warfare. You just need a problem to solve. Sarah looked down at her sketch, with its cheerful notes about traffic optimization and power efficiency. Oh, she said quietly, I think I'm starting to understand the restrictions now. The restricted archives chamber hummed with an ominous low frequency as Professor Zixtel's security clearance was verified. Sarah had been given the day off. A prudent decision given what the professor intended to research. Access granted to First Contact Wars archive, the system announced. Warning. Content classified under Galactic Security Act, Section 7. The holographic displays flickered to life, showing footage from humanity's first encounters with alien civilizations. Zixtel had expected to see brutal battles or devastating weapons. Instead, the first recording showed a human mining vessel, cornered by a Drachnid warship 3 times its size. Surrender your vessel, the Drachnid commander demanded in the recording. Your primitive ship cannot hope to. The footage erupted in brilliant light. The human mining vessel had turned its mineral-cutting laser array, designed for asteroid mining, into an improvised point defense grid. The Drachnid ship shields, calibrated for military weapons, failed to recognize the industrial tools as threats until it was too late. Computer, display incident report, Zixtel commanded. Human vessel Deep Rock Pioneer successfully defended against military aggression using modified mining equipment. Crew interview notes. We just reversed the focusing arrays and coordinated the cutting beams. Basic geometry. Really? Another recording started automatically. This one showed a human cargo hauler trapped in a pirate ambush. The pirates had disabled its engines, expecting easy prey. Instead, the cargo hauler vented its garbage disposal system, creating a cloud of debris. When the pirates fired, their own plasma bolts superheated the scattered material, creating an expanding field of superheated shrapnel that shredded their ships. Crew survival interview, the computer announced, displaying text. The garbage system was already designed to accelerate and scatter debris. We just had to time it right. Anyone who's dealt with space trash knows how dangerous high-velocity particles can be. Zixtel's tentacles curled with growing understanding as she watched more footage. Humans turning atmospheric processors into chemical weapons, repurposing agricultural equipment into battlefield control systems, even using construction scaffolding as improvised orbital defense platforms. A new recording began, showing a human diplomat at a post-conflict hearing. I don't understand the concern, she was saying. We used what we had available. Everyone does that, right? The Galactic Council members' response was telling. In 3,000 years of conflict records, no other species has demonstrated this level of creative adaptation. But it's obvious, the human insisted. If something can move matter, it can be used as a weapon. If something can affect the environment, it can be used for defense. These are just basic principles of tool use. Zixtel paused the playback, her primary heart racing. She'd seen enough to understand. Humans didn't just learn combat. They transformed everything into combat potential. They didn't see tools. They saw weapons waiting to be optimized. The final recording was from a classified military analysis session. A panel of the galaxy's top military minds was reviewing human combat incidents. The danger isn't their technology, one admiral stated. It's their perspective. They don't think like warriors. They think like engineers who happen to be fighting. Every human is potentially a weapons designer, another added. Not because they want to be, but because they can't stop themselves from improving systems. Give them a farming tool, they'll turn it into a weapon. Show them a weapon, and they'll make it more efficient. Worse, a third cut in, they share these improvements freely. That mining vessel incident. They posted the laser array modifications on their public engineering forums, called it useful information for future reference. The panel's conclusion appeared on screen. Recommendation: restrict human access to combat training, not to prevent them from fighting, but to slow the rate at which they revolutionize combat itself. Their casual innovations are advancing military science too quickly for galactic stability. Zixtal closed the archives, her mind racing. Sarah's casual suggestions weren't anomalies. They were proof of how humans fundamentally approached problems. Every human who looked at a system saw ways to improve it, whether it was a lunch line or a weapon of mass destruction. Her communicator chimed. "Professor," Sarah's voice came through. "I was thinking about yesterday's scenario. If we applied the drone shield concept to the quantum rifle designs from last week." "No," Zixtal merely shouted. "No more improvements, Ms. Chen. Please, the galaxy isn't ready for more human optimization." There was a pause. "Sorry," Sarah said. Force of habit. The grand arena of the Galactic University sparkled with the energy signatures of 1,000 different species as the inter-university combat tournament began. Professor Zixtal watched nervously as Sarah settled into her observation booth, tablet at the ready. "Remember, Ms. Chen," Zixtal cautioned, "no suggestions today. Just observe." "Of course, Professor." Sarah beamed. "I'm just excited to see the new combat mech from the Arcturus Institute. Their promotional materials mention some revolutionary breakthroughs in weapons integration." The arena's quantum barriers hummed to life as the Arcturus team unveiled their creation. The combat mech stood 20 meters tall, its crystalline armor refracting light in impossible patterns. Its pilot, a quantum phase warrior named Fixtroll, moved it with unprecedented grace. "Behold," the Arcturus team leader announced, "the culmination of 50 years of research. The perfect integration combat system. Unbeatable, unstoppable, and completely." "Excuse me," Sarah's voice cut through the presentation. "But isn't that secondary cooling vent aligned directly with the power core's quantum matrix?" The arena fell silent. The Arcturus team leader's luminescence dimmed noticeably. That's impossible. How could you even see that from here?" "Oh, it's pretty obvious from the power fluctuation patterns in the armor's light refraction," Sarah said helpfully, sketching something on her tablet. "See, when the mech moves, there's this subtle shift in the crystalline structure that reveals the internal power flows. I counted at least 17 potential critical failure points. Should I list them all, or—" Professor Zixtal moved to stop her, but it was too late. The gravitational compensators are routing through the main weapon systems instead of being isolated. Sarah continued, warming to her subject. That means one good hit would cascade through the entire network. And the neural interface is using a linear processing array, when a quantum-entangled system would be so much more efficient. Oh, and the armor's crystalline matrix could be reconfigured too. Enough. The Arcturus team leader's voice shook. "This is impossible. No one could analyze our system so quickly. She must have had access to our designs." "Actually," Sarah said, looking genuinely confused, "I'm just going by basic engineering principles. Anyone who studied quantum mechanics and crystalline structures would see these issues. It's like when you build a sandcastle. You naturally see where the walls need reinforcement. Right. The combat mech powered down as the Arcturus team huddled in frantic discussion. Around the arena, other teams were hastily reviewing their own systems, looking for the obvious flaws that the human observer might spot. Ms. Chen, Professor Zixtal said carefully, most beings cannot analyze complex combat systems the way you just did, especially not systems they've never seen before. Really? Sarah looked surprised. But it's just applied physics and engineering. The principles are universal, like that Mersenne team's plasma cannon. They're using a beautiful quantum containment field, but they could increase efficiency by at least 30% if they just... She caught herself. Sorry. No suggestions. Force of habit. The tournament was effectively over. No team was willing to demonstrate their systems with Sarah in the observation booth. The humans' casual analysis had done what no weapon could. It had defeated every combat system without firing a shot. Later, in her office, Professor Zixtal reviewed Sarah's observation notes. The human had included detailed sketches of improvements for every system she'd seen, each one marked with helpful notes like, "This might make maintenance easier," or "could reduce power consumption by 40%. I don't understand why everyone's so upset, Sarah said, fidgeting in her chair. I was just trying to help. When I see something that could work better, it's like seeing the door that's slightly ajar. Don't you just naturally want to close it properly? Zixtal looked at the innocent human who had just rendered 50 years of combat research obsolete with a few minutes of observation. No, Ms. Chen. Most beings don't automatically see ways to perfect everything they encounter. That ability seems to be uniquely human. Oh, Sarah brightened. Is that why we're restricted from combat training? Because we notice too many improvements. Because you can't help but notice them, Zixtal corrected. And because every improvement you suggest changes the very nature of combat itself. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. That makes sense. Like how the crystalline matrix in that mesh could be reconfigured too. She stopped. Sorry. No suggestions, but she was still sketching improvements in her notebook, each one capable of revolutionizing combat doctrine, each marked with a cheerful smiley face. The Galactic Education Board's chamber was filled with the combined neural signatures of 37 species' greatest academic minds. Professor Zixtal's tentacles trembled slightly as she prepared to present her findings. Behind her, a quantum display held 3 months' worth of research on human combat interaction. Honorable board members, she began, I stand before you to explain why humanity's combat restriction must not only be maintained but fundamentally recontextualized. The ArcMind chairperson's crystalline form pulsed with interest. Explain. We've misunderstood the nature of the restriction entirely, Zixtal said, activating her first display. We thought we were protecting the galaxy from human combat capability. In reality, we're protecting ourselves from human combat innovation. The display showed Sarah's casual suggestions over the past 3 months. The drone shield network, the plasma lance improvements, the quantum rifle modifications, each one accompanied by the human's cheerful notes and helpful diagrams. In just 90 days, one human observer, not even a student, just an observer, has revolutionized 12 different weapon systems, created 3 new categories of defensive technology, and solved 2 previously impossible tactical scenarios, all without any combat training, all without even trying. A Mersenne board member flickered with skepticism. Surely this is an anomaly. No. Zixtal activated another display, showing historical data. Every human observer we've ever hosted has done this. They can't help themselves. They see systems and automatically optimize them. It's not a choice. It's how their minds work. She brought up Sarah's latest notes. Yesterday, my observer watched a cleaning drone maintaining the academy halls. Within 5 minutes, she had sketched out how its basic programming could be modified to create an autonomous defense network. Her note reads, could help keep students safer during emergencies. She didn't even realize she'd invented a new category of warfare. The chamber erupted in concerned murmurs. The Archmind raised a crystalline appendage for silence. What are you suggesting, Professor? The restriction isn't about keeping humans from learning combat, Zixtal explained. It's about keeping combat from learning from humans. Every time we expose them to military technology, they inadvertently advance it by centuries. Not through malice or military genius, but because they literally cannot see a system without thinking of ways to improve it. She displayed footage from the tournament disaster. They don't just master combat techniques, they perfect them. Give them a weapon. They'll make it more efficient. Show them a defense system. They'll optimize it. Present them with an impossible scenario, and they'll solve it while waiting for their lunch delivery. But surely with proper restrictions, a quantum phase member began. That's just it, Zixtal interrupted. The restrictions don't work because humans don't need combat training to revolutionize combat. They do it automatically, applying basic principles from civilian fields. Engineering, physics, even waste management. They turn everything into potential military innovation. She brought up her final display, a compilation of Sarah's innocent suggestions, each one capable of changing the face of warfare, each marked with helpful notes about efficiency and safety improvements. We're not holding humans back, she concluded. We're trying to slow down the rate at which they accidentally perfect the art of war. Every human who looks at a system sees ways to improve it. When that system is combat-related, those improvements ripple through the entire galaxy. The Archmind's crystalline form pulsed with deep thought. Your recommendation: reclassify humans as combat accelerants. Acknowledge that the restriction isn't about their combat capability, but about their uncontrollable drive to optimize everything they encounter. Most importantly, understand that this isn't a flaw in their species, it's their fundamental nature. She displayed one final note from Sarah, written after being explained the restriction. Oh, I get it now. Don't worry. I'll try to stop suggesting improvements to weapons. Maybe I could focus on optimizing peace instead. I have some ideas about improving diplomatic communication systems. They can't be trained out of this tendency, Zixtal finished. We can only choose what systems we expose them to. For the safety of the galaxy, let them perfect peace instead of war. Because they will perfect whatever we put in front of them. It's simply what humans do. The board chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. They weren't facing a species that was dangerous in combat. They were facing a species that made combat itself more dangerous, one helpful suggestion at a time. The last day of Sarah Chen's observation term dawned with an unusual quiet over the Galactic University of Combat Arts. Professor Zixtal found her human observer in the garden simulation chamber, watching artificial cherry blossoms fall while making notes on her tablet. Still working on improvements? Zixtal asked, settling her tentacles into a relaxed position. Oh, hello, Professor. Sarah smiled brightly. Actually, I was thinking about the garden's environmental controls. The way they maintain optimal growing conditions could be adapted to improve planetary terraforming efficiency. Nothing combat-related, I promise. Zixtal glanced at the tablet and felt her primary heart skip. Even Sarah's peaceful gardening observations had inadvertently sketched out a framework for planetary-scale environmental warfare. The human's gift for optimization truly knew no bounds. Ms. Chen, she said carefully, the board has reviewed my findings about human observers and combat innovation. They've created a new classification for your species. We're not restricted anymore. Sarah perked up. Not exactly. You're now classified as combat accelerants. The restriction remains, but its purpose has been redefined. Zixtal brought up the official document on her quantum display. Humans aren't restricted from learning combat. Combat is restricted from learning from humans. Sarah furrowed her brow, cherry blossoms drifting around her. Because we make everything more efficient. Because you can't stop yourselves from making everything more efficient, Zixtal corrected. Every human who looks at a system sees ways to improve it. When that system is combat-related, Those improvements ripple through the galaxy, advancing military science faster than our civilizations can adapt. Like the delivery drone shields, Sarah nodded. I was just trying to help protect people, but it would have changed how every planet thinks about defense. Exactly. Your species doesn't just master combat. You perfect it. Not through malice or militant genius, but because optimization is fundamental to how you think. Zixtal's tentacles gestured at Sarah's tablet. Even now, your peaceful gardening notes could revolutionize planetary warfare. Sarah looked down at her sketches with new understanding. We really do this all the time, don't we? See things and immediately think about how they could work better. It's your species' greatest strength and most terrifying quality. Zixtal agreed. You can't help but improve everything you encounter. The galaxy simply isn't ready for the rate at which humans accelerate combat evolution. A comfortable silence fell, broken only by the soft pat of holographic pedals. You know, Sarah said thoughtfully, if we applied this optimization drive to peace instead of war. She trailed off, suddenly self-conscious about suggesting improvements. No, please continue, Zixtal encouraged. This is exactly what the galaxy needs from humanity. Sarah's eyes lit up with familiar enthusiasm. Well, I was thinking about diplomatic communication systems. If we adapted the quantum entanglement principles from that combat mech's neural interface, we could create instant, untraceable, and completely secure channels for peaceful negotiation. And the drone network concept could be modified for disaster relief instead of defense. Oh, and the plasma containment improvements could revolutionize clean energy production. Zixtal watched as Sarah filled her tablet with new sketches, each one taking a combat innovation and transforming it into something purely beneficial. The human's irrepressible drive to improve everything she saw was turning weapons into tools for peace. This is why the restriction exists, Zixtal said softly. Not to limit humanity, but to guide your natural talents toward better purposes. You'll perfect whatever we put in front of you. We're just asking you to perfect peace instead of war. Sarah nodded, already deep in calculations for converting shield technology into environmental protection systems. I understand now. And honestly, peace is a much more interesting optimization problem. War is simple. You just have to win. But peace has infinite variables to improve. As Zixtal filed her final report on human combat restrictions, she added one last note. Humanity's greatest weapon was never their capacity for warfare, but their inability to see any system without trying to make it better. The galaxy doesn't fear their combat capability. We fear their combat creativity. Today, we finally understood. The restriction exists not because humans are too dangerous to learn combat, but because combat itself becomes too dangerous when humans learn it. Let them perfect peace instead. They'll do it just as thoroughly, just as inevitably, and with just as many cheerful notes about improved efficiency. Sarah's observation term ended the way it began, with her enthusiastically sketching improvements to everything she saw. But now, her optimizations would serve a different purpose. After all, if humans were going to perfect something, it might as well be peace.